Well, our guest this session is Larry Sparano. He's a longtime anchor down at Fox 40 News. He is also a investigative reporter, and he and I worked together for about 7 years down in Binghamton at Fox 40 back in the day. And he is a guy I pretty much disagree with about on everything. But aside from that, he's a great guy. And how are you, Larry? Where are you calling from, and what's the story?
I'm calling from Scranton, or as the natives say, Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is Biden's boyhood home.
Well, let's start off with where you guys think we are in terms of the election. Larry, why don't you start? Where do you think Biden and Trump stand right now at this moment?
You know, as we've said in our discussions on WIOX, I think this one's hard to call. Now, as you remember, and as I remind you periodically, I called Trump's victory 4 years ago when you thought I was nuts. And I said at the time, if he gets the nomination, he's going to be the next president. I was certain then. This time, I don't know how it's going to turn out. There's still a lot of things in play, a lot of pluses for Trump, a lot of minuses for him as well, and vice versa with Biden. So I'm not sure at all what's going to be the final outcome. And I think a lot's going to depend now on the debates, if there is a debate, and you know, how people see who's really to blame for the spread of the coronavirus. So these are kind of like unknown elements at this point.
Right. How do you feel, Fred?
I believe, God, I hope Biden wins. I don't believe the democracy can withstand another 4 years of Donald Trump. I don't believe it can stand another 4 months of Donald Trump. So I'm hoping I live until November 3rd so that I can vote against him. And I'm hoping that Ruth Bader Ginsburg lives past January 22nd so that he does not get to replace her as a lame duck president. Because it's clear to me that despite the fact that Mitch McConnell kept the Supreme Court at 8 people for a year so that Barack Obama could not replace a judge, he and Trump will confirm somebody or work to confirm them during his lame duck period. I fear that Trump will find more and more ways to steal the election. I do not fear that he will simply refuse to leave the White House because we have Marines for that.
Jerry, how about you?
Well, I think it's really going to depend on half a dozen swing states is what it amounts to. And I think things are going to be a lot closer than some of us would hope. Right now, it certainly looks like Biden has a substantial lead in most of these swing states. But I think it will get closer and closer as we get to the election. One of the things, Larry, that really puzzles me, and I'm not talking about the evangelicals, but the white, non-educated, by non-college educated working class, why they are so strong supporters of Trump. When I look at my family, all my aunts, my uncles, my father, etc., none of them went to college except for my mother, but they were not ignorant, I will put it that way. They knew what was in their self-interest. And when I look at Trump, when I look at things like trying to do away with the Affordable Care Act or not pushing for a higher minimum wage, this works against their self-interest. Why are they such strong supporters?
I think because they don't really see it that way. And as I mentioned previously, what they see is that they've been disenfranchised. Now, although Kent doubts the truth of what I say, I've been a lifelong liberal Democrat. But, you know, when I was a kid and during my parents' day, both parents were factory workers, the Democrats were clearly aligned with the interests of the working class. That's what they were doing. That's the way it was perceived. So there was strong support in those days from the working class. With the outsourcing of jobs, which accelerated it started with Clinton when he signed NAFTA. Now that involved Canada and Mexico. But that opened the doors, which became floodgates as the years went along. And during the 8 years of the Obama administration with Joe Biden, I didn't hear them talking much about stopping that outflow of jobs from China. So the working class feels betrayed. That's an overwhelming concern of them. The jobs, they also, they feel that the political correctness has become so extreme that they're beginning to resent being called racist every time they turn around. And I think with this current campaign, Biden is pushing that a little too much, and there's going to be a reaction to that. So, you know, there's certainly some real racism involved there, but the working class just feels that it's been shoved aside, and all the support and attention is going to political identity groups and minorities. Again, rightly or wrongly, that is perception, and that is why they're strongly supporting Trump.
How do you feel about that, George?
My first response will be a question. What's the evidence that Donald Trump supports the working class? Where is the evidence that anything he's done that's the case?
Here, here.
Well, he's making a good play for that. You know, he knows how to promote those ideas. Now, whether that's the reality is a separate issue. But what I'm saying is, it's the perception out there. And there's no doubt with hard evidence that the jobs have been allowed by both sides to be outsourced to China and other nations. And the industrial base of the US has been gutted. And that's one of the core issues with the working class and to some extent the middle class as well.
Did they get the tax breaks that the top 1% got?
No, I know. But again, all of those issues, you know, which takes more analysis, more information, more following closely the news, that's subsumed by these overriding issues. You know, it's this disgruntlement of the working class. And again, you know, when Kent and I were working in Binghamton, New York, Hillary Clinton was the senator there. And when you had the breakdown, the meltdown with Wall Street, she wasn't outraged about it. She just said the strongest thing she said was that, well, I told them that they shouldn't be doing that, so they shouldn't do it again. You know, as I've told Ken a number of times, both sides are feeding off the trough. Both sides are feathering their own nests. Both sides are corrupt. And the working class perceives Trump as a change agent. Again, rightly or wrongly, that's the perception. That they have to drain the swamp. They have to clean up all the people that have failed them all those years. So they're hoping that Trump would do that for them. That was Trump's pitch, and they absorbed it.
His drainers are in prison now.
What?
His drainers are in prison now.
Yeah, a lot of them are.
I think
John, jump in. How do you feel?
well, yeah, I think the nature of might say a reactionary populism is to fool the working class and make them think that you're for them when you're screwing them. And I would say the Trump people have been very good at pulling that off. And they see that the Democrats are the Democratic platform. There's like an issue on labor. Most of the working people are for a single payer when they poll them. But even the union representatives on the Democratic Central Committee wouldn't support single payer when it came to the platform. So you have your union representatives of the Democrats playing this kind of politics and selling out what should be, talk about people not backing their own interests. Of course, their interest is not the same as the worker on the floor. I mean, these are operators in the union and they're playing politics. But I think that kind of thing renders the workers on the floor, they're going to be vulnerable to other kinds of appeal. They don't see a champion out there among the Democrats who say they have been their champions, but it's just chin music.
Yeah.
The Democrats play. So these people are confused, they're frightened, they're insecure, and Trump is going after them. And that's not, and Trump, of course, I mean, the people behind Trump, whoever these groups are, with the Mercer Foundation, these other people, they're playing a game that's pretty complicated and deep as far as foreign policy and, Judeo-Christian return to the way it was. They have all sorts of, they have a game plan. And I just hope the Democrats, you see what the Democrats are coming up with. I can only hope that it's effective, but looking at their convention, I didn't find myself being all that encouraged. There were a few good speeches, but nothing too solid to bank on at this point to me.
Larry, let me ask you, since Trump was elected to drain the swamp, to have chaos, to disrupt the current system, he's had 3.5 years to do that. Do his supporters feel that he's succeeded in doing that? Are we very different than we were 3.5 years ago?
I think the perception is things have gotten somewhat better, and they would have been much better if they were not subjected to the attacks of the Democrats. They blame the Democrats for holding Trump back for everything that he wants to do. Again, that is the perception. And don't forget, there's also this upheaval now of the rioting. The peaceful protest is one thing, but if you look at what's really been going on in these big cities, I mean, it's robbing, it's looting, it's arson, people getting shot, and the Trump supporters watch Fox News, which shows this all the time. Of course, they have their own axe to grind. But I think even though it's not being shown by CNN and the other mainstream networks very much, if at all, among these cities, in these areas of the country, that word locally is spreading about how crazy it's getting in the streets. And they blame the liberal Democrats that are in power as attorneys general, as mayors, governors, and all that for standing down and allowing this to happen. So there's a growing backlash on that. Don't forget, Nixon got in on law and order coming out of the riots and the upheaval of the 60s and early 70s. And at the time, he said there's a silent majority, and I think that's at work here as well. I've told Trump I've told Ken a number of times that it's really difficult to read the polls, how accurate they are. Biden seems to be ahead, but then again, on the methodology of the polls, it depends on the sampling and all that. And some of the polls show just a few points difference now, where others have a wider spread. But again, I think a big element here now that may be a deciding factor with at least some of the population is how Biden does in the debates. I mean, there's already the perception out there that he's has the beginnings of dementia, and by voting for Biden, you'd actually be voting for Kamala Harris. So there's that at work there. Now, if he does well in the debates, that may erase that perception. But that's an open question at this point.
But I mean, don't you?
Can I make a point? Let me make a point.
Go ahead.
In the Minneapolis Star-Tribune today, it is reported that 2 men from nearby suburbs, 2 white men, were indicted for attempting to set fire during the peaceful demonstrations or riots or whatever you call it to a bank on Lake Street in Minneapolis. White supremacists came in clothed as supporters of unrest and created a lot of the rioting that occurred, so that it got a bad name that it did not deserve.
I think there may have been some of that, but if you look at all the video of what's going on, I mean, clearly these were people that were not, a lot of them were not white people. And I mean, look at this recent thing where this guy was kicked in the head and all that, almost beaten to death. And they've just arrested that guy. His name was Love. I forgot his first name. Look at the black guy who shot a 5-year-old kid in the head, a white kid, point blank. Now, you can't ascribe all of that to white supremacists agitating. Some of that may be at work. But
yeah, but I think, Larry, race is the big elephant in the room here. I mean, I think especially now in 2020, that a lot of the Trump people it's become sort of a cult. I mean, they'll do anything he wants to say. They'll believe anything he says. And secondly, I think they're just it's been a reaction to racism. I mean, I think but I think the country is further along in terms of race right now than it was back in 2016.
Ken,
Well,
I agree with that, but what I'm saying is, by making injustices and always bringing up during their Democratic convention, whenever they make speeches about all the wounds of racism and slavery and all that, by harping on that so much, you're going to be getting a defensive reaction from white voters.
How do you feel about Jews harping on the Holocaust? Is that harping? Because it's not 400 years old.
Well, I mean, Jews are certainly entitled to talk about the Holocaust.
Then blacks should be entitled to talk about what's happened to them for the last 400 years.
To the extent that every time somebody makes a speech, you know, the white people are reminded that, you know, the country was founded on slavery and there were all these injustices, now reparations and all that. What I'm saying is, no matter what you think the real justice is of this or injustice, I'm saying politically, it's not a good strategy for the Democrats, because you're going to get a white backlash and resentment. Whites are saying, you know, I don't consider myself racist, and every time I turn around, white people are being accused of racism. As a political strategy, I don't think it's effective, and the Democrats don't recognize that.
I mean, how do you feel about Black Lives Matter? I mean, do you think it's good or bad, or do you think it's helping Trump?
I think Trump is getting mileage out of that, because as I mentioned, Ken, Black Lives Matter, these demonstrations that are going on now, look at how well organized they are, how well equipped, how well financed. Black Lives Matter is funded by 1.67 billion, with a B, $1.67 billion in corporate donations mostly. And you could see how how the protests, which involve rioting as well, are continuing for months now. And there's a reaction to that. So I think what I'm saying is, Ken, you know, certainly there were injustices, certainly they continue. But, you know, how systemic racism could be in this country if a black guy was elected president. What I'm saying is, it's being emphasized too much unnecessarily, because whites have been moving beyond that. You know, it's a far cry from when John Lewis was marching. And you know, I have total admiration for John Lewis.
Nobody kneeled on his neck when he was marching.
Nobody kneeled on his neck. And
hit him over the head.
So what progress are we making?
What progress? First of all, we have a black president. We have blacks in positions of power around the country. So that's a lot of progress. You never had that before in the 60s during the beginning of the civil rights movement. What I'm saying is, a lot of this progress is already happening, but by playing the victimization all the time, you're getting a backlash of resentment. It's human nature.
Larry, this is Jerry. I understand what you're saying, and I agree to some extent. And when we look at, quote, the looting in Chicago recently, which I'm sure is playing on Fox News all the time, that had nothing to do with Black Lives Matter. That was just pure criminal looting is what it amounted to. That's going to be a backlash. But I also look at the demographics. You know, maybe not this election, but in the next 1 or 2 decades, whites will be a minority in the United States. So as we appeal more and more to minorities, quote, to the Asians, to the blacks, to the Hispanics, you know, sooner or later, it's not going to matter so much, in my opinion, how much backlash you get from the small minority of whites. Now in 2020, that may still matter, but I still think that we have a large amount of minority voting that is coming out because of Black Lives Matter, because of Kamala Harris being nominated. And I think that's going to overwhelm the backlash that you're talking about.
I'm not sure if it'll overwhelm it in 2020, as you said, but certainly the demographics are trending towards a black majority, a white minority. And, you know, that's certainly the way the nation is heading. But
John, I mean, how do you, John, let me ask you, you sort of agree with Larry on the politicization thing.
Well, I think it is a political. All right, black people make up, okay, say 12, 15% of the country. I don't think there's any ethnic group fighting just mainly for its own interests that then takes over 12 or 15% of the country. It has to be coalitions of people. And so if you need coalitions of people, then your political thrust has to be such that you're going to gain them. And you have to have a leadership and principles that are designed to do that. Otherwise, you won't have enough people going your way, assuming your way is a good way, which also isn't always the case. But getting back to this, you know, South Africa had a white minority for many decades, and it even has one now. But the economic clout is still mainly among the whites, as it was during the apartheid period. So you can have a demographic, you can count up the people and they can be, you know, 70, 80% this color, that color, this shade. But when it gets to the economic structure and who owns it and who has that power, that's another question. So you could have a country here that is where if you're just playing just ethnic groups, but it's beyond that. Who's got the money and what are their interests? And they can divide people. Do you know the apartheid movement in South Africa was partly driven by a desire to keep the white and Boer workers and the black workers from uniting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Carnegie Institution research from the 30s, the reports on the history of South Africa, they, with malice aforethought, came up with ideologies that would split the working class people from coming together. And the same thing can go on here. In fact, it's going on here. So, you know, this numbers game doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, John. And, you know, and also, that's the way societies evolve. That's the way they're structured. Now, before the European ethnics came in the last part of the last century, first part of the last part of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, the WASPs were in control. And financially, politically, high society, and then gradually the European ethnics gained some status, gained some monetary success, and now are part of that mix, even though you still have the old school WASPs that are embedded, you know, deeply in the system. So you had a gradual change of that. And I think that'll happen also with minorities as the demographics change. It will take a while, as it did for the European ethnics, to make their presence known and to become financially influential. But, you know, that'll eventually happen with minorities as they become the majority.
So George, where are you at?
So it's hard to know where to start, Kent. So let me start here. Do I remember that someone in this group said some weeks ago that they were a fan of the TV show Law and Order?
I don't.
Well, either way, there's an episode of Law and Order where the Richard Brooks character basically plays the race card to get his client off. And at a later point in the show, he's talking to the white assistant district attorney who asks him, why did he have to play the race card? And his answer is, everything is about race. And I guess that's the way I feel. Rightly or wrongly, that's the way I feel. Everything is about race. The black jobless rate in June was 17%. The white jobless rate was 12.5%. Black people are disproportionately being infected and dying from this pandemic. It seems to me that the interests of Black people are at the heart of the success or failure of the Democrats in this upcoming election. And I don't think there can be much doubt that the attempts nationwide, including here in the state of Georgia, to suppress votes are specifically designed to suppress Black votes.
Well, they're suppressing Hispanic votes, and Hispanics also have very bad numbers as far as the diseases and the virus, and also on wages. So it's not just Black folks getting it. And then you have a segment of white people, especially in the rural areas, and also in the cities where they used to have good factory jobs that are not there any longer. So there are various people who have various levels of claims of not doing well right now. It would behoove them to figure out how to come together and win an election and have a party that represented their interests rather than go at each other.
Yeah, workers of the world unite, but of course, if you throw out that phrase, you're immediately labeled a socialist, a communist, a Bolshevik, and all that. But yeah, I mean, back in the 30s, that was going on.
Yeah, well, I think the reality is, if people don't get together that way, they're not going to have any alternatives.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
Larry, let me ask you.
a boogeyman term.
Excuse me?
That's why it's a boogie. That's why to call them all. That's why Trump calls everyone a socialist, a leftist, a communist, and this or that.
Right.
And all the Fox News people. This is a form of, as far as I'm concerned, brainwashing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just like they dissed Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
They had him as a bomb-throwing Bolshevik. When
Yeah.
I mean, Social Security is socialism. Are we going to eliminate that? But
Exactly.
Not if you ask the white, non-educated class. No, they don't. They want their Social Security, they want their Medicare, but they don't consider it socialism. They consider it their right, is what it amounts to.
yeah,
Let me ask you specifically about Pennsylvania. And let's go back to the Black
I would
vote.
argue that Black people who supported Biden over Sanders are similarly deluded.
If
The South Carolinians, as far as I'm concerned, they bungled.
Larry, let me ask you, in Pennsylvania, if I understand it, in order for Biden to win Pennsylvania, he has to have a very large turnout in Philadelphia, which is primarily a Black vote in Philadelphia. So given your crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen? Are we going to be able to get a very large Black vote out of Philadelphia?
well, don't forget, it was the Black vote out of Philadelphia and to a lesser extent Pittsburgh and some of the other larger areas that put that went strongly for Hillary, but it wasn't enough to counteract the boondocks with Trump the last time. Now, this time, the demographics, what the Democrats have going this time, which they didn't so much in 2016, is that more of the minorities of all colors, of all ethnic backgrounds, more of them are now much more attuned to getting out to vote, that's the way to change things. Don't forget, historically, especially in the beginning of the civil rights movement, it was tough to get Blacks out to the polls. And that continued to a large extent up until recent years. But now in the past 4 years, the leaders are much more organized in getting people to polls, and the minority population itself, I think, is much more aware of the importance of turning out. So that may be enough to put Biden over if they turn out the numbers that he needs. But don't forget, Trump's supporters are rabid, and they'll go to the polls, come hell or high water. So again, that's why I find this a very difficult one to call at this point, what's going to happen. It's there's so many competing pluses and minuses for both these candidates. But I think a big difference this year, 4 years later, is that the minority vote is much more likely to turn out in stronger numbers than it did the last time.
I mean, plus,
In the old days, it was not difficult to get Blacks to come out and vote in the South. What it was difficult to get them to go home safely after they voted.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
hearing from people.
I understand that, and I understand the voter suppression, but I grew up in Connecticut, and I was involved in local politics in Connecticut, and we had a tough time in the 60s getting Blacks to come out to vote for their own interests. So in the South, I understand it was tough to vote, it was dangerous to vote, there was real voter suppression, but that wasn't so much the case in the North. And you still couldn't get people out to vote. You couldn't get a lot of ethnic people out to vote. I'm an Italian American, when I got involved in local politics, I had a next door neighbor, an Italian family. I went to their door and said, you know, I hope you'll vote for me. And it's like, oh, if there isn't anything good on TV, we may show up. So, I mean, even among a lot of the white ethnic groups, there wasn't that drive to get out to the polls, which is why over the years, small groups of people, well organized, were able to get their candidates elected because of the low voter turnout. So again, I think that's changing, which is going to help Biden this time.
What I'm hearing from people that I talk to here in Georgia, and it's a small sample, and it's a sample that I've been in contact through my daughter, whom you guys know, is that people, black voters are saying, we will stand out in the rain, run the risk of COVID for as long as we have to vote in this election.
Mm-hmm.
Hear, hear.
Oh, that could make the difference. That can make the difference.
Larry, one other question in terms of voting, in terms of mail-in ballots at this point in time, there's no question that Trump would like to decrease the amount of mail-in ballots. What do you think at this point in time? Do you think indeed we are suppressing people at this point? Do you think the Postmaster General, who just testified on Friday, as, quote, truthful in that, yes, every ballot will be counted and counted on time?
This is what I think, you know, and at the risk of coming off as the token redneck here, which is why I think Ken invited me on.
Oh,
Never.
Ken and I have discussed this a number of times, and clearly Trump would like to suppress the vote with the mail-in ballots. However, he's got a point that I think mass mail-in voting is open to fraud on both sides. Absentee ballots are a different story. That's been going on for years, but masses of mail-in ballots, who are they going to? Who's sending them back? I don't think it's a good way to go. Now, the problem is, here's another thing, you know, looking at the November election, what happens if both sides challenge the results, depending on the states, wherever they are, or whoever wins or loses is challenge it. It's held up for weeks, months, maybe it ends up in the Supreme Court. And then, you know, social eruptions continue, including rioting. What's going to happen then? You know, I think we could be headed to a very dangerous period here with the election results if it's not a clear-cut victory.
I would like to see the Democrats fighting for a national voting holiday.
Yeah.
And measures like that, fighting hard for that, putting that kind of idea up there.
Yeah, there should be a national voting
rather than going just for this this voting by mail, putting all the.
Guys, you may be aware that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund has filed suit against the post office.
Yeah.
To reverse the changes that they've made.
Right. Right.
I guess I don't see the wisdom in sending a ballot to everyone who is registered, but I do see the wisdom in sending an application for an absentee ballot to everyone that is
That's what I'm
registered.
saying. That's what I'm saying. That's a better way to go.
But there are states where you only vote by mail. I think Oregon is one of the states.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for years and years and years. And to the best of my knowledge, there's not been a lot of fraud involved in that. Certainly.
And Utah too, Jerry.
Yeah. Well,
where you are.
That was before all this political dissension, where both sides, you know, have a motive to mess up the balloting. You know, it's a much more tenuous situation now.
Some states have a history of political corruption beyond other states. I mean, it varies across the country. Which states have already had corrupt little machines operating in them for decades and which don't. So it's a measure that I worry about. But getting back though, also what you mentioned, Larry, I got to weigh in on. I think it's not good journalism of the CNN and the others not to show the violence that's going on, not just at the demonstrations, in the cities at all. To turn away from it and conceal it, pretend it's not happening. It's a big mistake.
Yeah, well, John, this is why I talk about with Kent all the time, that there is no longer any objective journalism. Fox is on one extreme, grinding their own axe. CNN, MSNBC is on the other. And, everything now has an agenda rather than presentation of facts. And it
Yeah.
wasn't that way when Kent Stay, when he was at CBS, he talks about a fact checker that they had, a school marmish type woman who made sure that their facts were correct before it went on the air. When what happened was when news became a moneymaker for the networks and the ratings became supreme, then you got the political agendas there and Fox is the one that actually pioneered this, where trying to go for a niche audience, not for the whole audience, but there was enough conservatives to make them supreme in the ratings in that element, and that was enough to make them successful. When the other networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and especially the cable networks, saw the success of that formula, they took the same tact, only on the liberal end. So, the truth and objectivity is now lost. It's difficult to find out really what the heck is going on accurately. You've got to mine the internet, and there's all kinds of agendas on the internet. You've got to do a lot of research to really get down to what you conclude could be the answer.
But there is PBS and NPR. I mean, don't you feel like
I find them slanted too, Kent. They're more liberal oriented, and I don't see much of a balance there with playing one person, a conservative against a liberal and all that. That's the failing now of journalism. There's very little objective journalism anymore. So what people do now is they tune into the station that makes them feel comfortable and reinforces their pre-existing beliefs and prejudices. So, when you talk to somebody, whether if it's conservative or liberal, that they all already have made up their mind because they're being fed filtered information. And
it's hard to balance fake news and lies.
How do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, Trump labels what I call a free press fake news, and he tells lies by the thousands himself. So I don't know how a news outlet could be balanced. They would have to tell a lie as if it were the truth, and then balance it with what Trump would call fake news.
No.
Well, you have to report the things that rebut and refute what he's saying. Instead of, I find the thing I don't like about CNN is after Trump's lied, someone comes on, Don Lemon or another, and they just tell you as if it's an op-ed. They're supposed to be reporting on something.
Exactly.
They should report and expose his falsehoods by presenting the facts. And you're just talking to one side, but unearth it as best you can.
Yeah.
But they don't do that. They just come on and say, he's telling another lie about something.
Yeah.
Not even trying to prove it to you.
What they've done is blended editorials with supposed straight news reporting. Now, you can't tell when it's an editorial and when it's a straight news report. Even the New York Times is doing that now.
It's creeping into the news stories. What used to be said opinion at the New York Times, I worked at the New York Times. If it was an opinion article, you put a little square that said opinion.
Right.
You never put, now they don't have opinion, and you read the article and you can tell it is an opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah, but John, I mean, I think if you were to rebut, if a news organization had to rebut every lie that...
you don't have to do it, right? Be selective.
Well, no, but I mean, he tells so many. He tells so many. And I think the thing about him is that he has no shame and doesn't care about if he lies or not. And that is a real challenge to any kind of news organization. In the sense that
he lied 700 times in the last week and have a whole big thing. Have some selectivity of which things are more important to people, which things are more effective in exposing him to even his own supporters, and get into that in a serious way. You don't have to try to cover, 700 falsehoods. Expose the big lie.
I think you're right, John. It doesn't matter if he lies about the size of the inaugural crowd.
Yeah,
It
right.
doesn't matter if he lies about hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
Well,
Larry,
that mattered to the people that took it.
Mhm.
But I agree with you, George, basically. And what John is saying, that you could pick the lies, and because you got plenty to pick from, you could pick the ones that are most likely to sway his uneducated base, and show them why this is a lie, refute the lie.
well,
But you know, also, John, what I object to is the lack now of the use of alleged, or so and so said, or so and so
Oh,
claims, so and so. You know, now it's presented without the alleged. You know,
Right.
Ken, when we worked together in Binghamton, one of the first things we taught the new kids coming in was always use alleged. You know, if the police say that so and so murdered somebody, you don't say so and so murdered somebody. You say police allege that.
Right.
That's gone now. They're
Yeah.
getting away
They
with
tell
it.
you what someone thinks. So and so thinks. No, he said he thought this.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's part of the whole thing now, where the objective journalism is no longer available.
Really pitiful. Really pitiful.
Larry, let me ask you back to the debates for just a second.
Yeah.
Since Trump lies all the time, is it beneficial for Biden even to debate him? Because
Aha. Are you part of the group that's working on how to get Biden out of the debate? Because I think that's one of the options they're considering, is to declare that since Trump lies so much and such is so vile, they're not going to give him the platform to spread more hate and lies, and therefore no debates. I think that's one of the options that they're considering.
That's a good argument. I think that's a good argument.
I don't. You know, the
I think
guy who could be the
he,
next president of the United States not subjecting himself to a debate.
No, but I think he proved that he doesn't have dementia, and that he can put two sentences together at the convention. I mean, I thought his speech
He
was.
did?
Oh,
Wasn't that off a
Well,
teleprompter?
reading. He just
What?
reading.
Wasn't that off a teleprompter?
sure, it was
Well,
on a teleprompter. But have you seen Trump on a teleprompter? I mean, come
Larry,
on.
what about the possibility that Trump won't want to debate?
I hadn't thought of that.
Well-
What would be the motivation there?
That he's got a lot of bad things to answer for, that a savvy preparation group would have Biden prepared to challenge him on.
But Biden can't execute anything that's very savvy.
Right, right.
He's mentally incapable, I believe, of standing there and give and take on the topic. I just don't think he's got his marbles there.
Well, he can. I see no way that Trump can defend his and the administration's performance on the pandemic.
Exactly.
I see no defense for that whatsoever.
Right. And I think I agree with you on that. And I think that makes it almost a one-issue election. I mean, people are just outraged about that. And I think that's going to be the main thing that's going to do Trump in.
So let me ask, Larry,
well-
let me ask, if that's the case, why would Trump want to go before the American public and face that accusation?
Because he's got a good spiel and he knows how to sell something, whether it's accurate or not. You know, another thing that got Trump elected was he wasn't talking highfalutin. He wasn't talking in abstract. He was talking down to earth, sometimes even vulgar, but it was the way ordinary people talk. He knows how to do that from working in TV. You know, Kent, when we were doing news, even though we didn't get down to that level, short sentences, no big words, something that could be absorbed quickly. Trump knows how to deliver that. So
But I mean, I think Biden can do that too. Don't you think?
I don't think so. Not from what
He
I've
could
seen.
at one time, he could, but I don't know if he can do it now. I really kind of wonder. Also, as far as the pandemic goes, there are many people out and around the country, like in our state here, many people feel that the Democrats are trying to make the pandemic worse if they can in certain areas of the state, just as a political ploy. There's a lot of sentiment of that
Yeah.
How are the Democrats
Attacking the
making
crews on certain regions, and so there's not just one view about the handling of the pandemic. There's not just one view on
how
the
are Democrats
pandemic.
making it worse?
They're making it worse by what is perceived as an exaggeration. Again, whether that's a reality is something separate from the perception. That's how people vote, on perceptions. Very few people vote on the real facts because they're hard to discern these days. Now, don't forget, I've had this discussion with Kent a number of times. In the beginning, Fauci was saying it was no big deal, wouldn't be serious in the US.
Yep.
And Biden was irate that Trump was restricting flights from China, that he was being xenophobic and all that.
Yeah.
So, you know, Trump, it wasn't just Trump not taking it seriously. Some of our so-called experts were saying, were giving him that advice. And then as it evolved, maybe he should have taken more action. But again, you know, his argument, which I think resonates with a lot of people, is how long can you keep the country so shut down that jobs are gone, businesses are gone, nobody can move freely? What are the consequences of that long term, both economically, mentally, physically, et cetera, et cetera? And people see a point to that. So again,
I don't think you have to do it long term,
Let's
but
be
you have to do it. You can't do 3 states do it left and 4 states do it right and 6 states go down the middle. You can't, that's not
barring
plan.
people from other states.
Exactly. He shut down travel from China, but he let Americans come back home and they brought the virus. It's not like this virus knows it's sticking to
How can you
a
have
Chinese
a
person.
How can you have a situation like in Michigan? They'll say, "Oh, okay, protesters can gather, and there's no limit on the number, but people going to church can't gather except for such and such a number." I mean, to people out in the boondocks, when they have that said to them, "Oh yeah, they're letting the protesters hang out and gather,
yeah,
and now we can't do this or we can't do that." Well, that's what's happening. So it's kind of that's soil for mischief, discontent, anger, resentment, and we're going to pay them back.
that's another point. I hear that all the time in this area, which is this area is a Democratic area, but conservative Democrat, and a lot of conservative Democrats cross over to Trump. But I hear that all the time from people. Well, what about the protests? You know, they allow that to go on, but we can't go to church. We can't do this. We can't open our store. So they see a hypocrisy there. Now, again, you know, that's separate from the reality of, you know, what should have been done, what wasn't done right. But people see this as an uneven thing where they're not telling the protesters to wear masks. De Blasio, leading protests in New York, a lot of people around him weren't wearing masks. And don't forget, you know, Biden. Now, I thought the presentation of him during the Democratic convention was very good in terms of humanizing him, making him appear very empathetic, those stories of the tragedy in his own life and all that. But as I mentioned to Ken, will that stick with people when Trump starts attacking him on the issues, that he's a nice guy, you know, that he's not a bully like Trump? But, you know, what will that really mean to people, whether they turn out to vote? And also, look at the baggage that Biden has had over the years. For instance, Hunter Biden, who was presented surprisingly at the convention, there's no way you can convince me that he didn't get that job in Ukraine because of his father's influence, who his father was, and also to an extent in China. So Biden is not as pure as a driven snow. As I've told Ken time and time again, both sides are corrupt. They take care of themselves. People are aware of that. And a lot of people I know are Trump supporters aren't in love with Trump, but they say enough of those guys. They've had their chance. So maybe there will be some changes with Trump.
So in other words, hiring people like Ivanka and Kushner are wonderful because they are so capable. Is that what you're saying, Larry?
Say that again.
If you're picking on Hunter, let's look in the mirror and let's look at Ivanka. Let's look at Kushner. You know, they only got their jobs because of what? Daddy.
Yeah, I know, but the difference is that Trump is making no apologies for that, but Biden and the Democrats have been portraying themselves as pure as a driven snow, and we see that they're just as corrupt.
But I don't think Biden got Hunter the job. I think the Ukraine gave Hunter the job because his father was vice president.
And his father
And I
had
think
no
that's a
awareness.
big difference.
It's not a big difference. His father had no awareness that his son was being given this lucrative job because of who the father was, and he didn't tell Hunter to cut it out on principle.
Why should he cut it out?
Excuse me?
Well, to show that they weren't corrupt. He should have refused it, really.
He should have refused it.
Wasn't the job something like $60,000 a month or something?
More than that.
600, I don't know, it was huge
That's
amount
the
of money.
job I'm
For a
looking
guy that
for.
didn't know the language. He had no knowledge of the business enterprise. It's just regular political pork fat.
As both sides engage in. Both sides have done that all along. But
So you think he should have refused the job, John?
he should have refused the job, and his own man should have told him, knock it off. I may be running for president, and you're taking a job with Ukraine that you're not qualified for, just to lap up the juice of that. Biden should have put his foot down. It's baloney that, oh, Biden didn't know about it and Hunter was, look, to me, it's so damn obvious.
I think it's more likely that Biden talked to the Ukrainians and greased the.
Larry, are you married?
Yes, I am.
Are you going to buy your wife clothes that Ivanka has had made in China?
No. I try to avoid anything made in China, which is very difficult to do because of the outsourcing, which the Democrats helped, because the Democrats were being funded by the big corporations for their campaigns. So yeah, let the jobs go to China as long as the corporate donations keep going to us. Now, Clinton is the one who pioneered that. He said to the party, he says, we got to get economic parity with the Republicans. So we've got to start going with the corporations. So people in the party said, well, we're going to lose the working class. And he said, where else are they going to go? They're going to stick with us. And that's what happened until they got fed up with it and elected Trump. Trump is a monster of their own creation. Just like
I agree with the monster part.
Just like Hitler was a monster of the unfair treatment of Germany after the First World War. That set the stage for the same kind of disgruntlement, which led to an extreme figure like Hitler taking power, and look at the atrocities there. So if anybody's to blame for the rise of Trump, it's the Democrats.
Not only that, though, but the monopolies. Hitler, the head of IG Farben, the Thyssen Corporation, all the big corporate monopoly heads met. And they decided, we're going to fund Hitler. The Nazis needed money, and they decided that's the horse we can ride.
Including the Bush family that were in on that.
Their friends were all.
But that's never mentioned by the media.
Including the Koch brothers.
Well, the Koch brothers is separate, but during the Second World War, Farber and the other corporation, the Bush family was in charge of that, or they had a big part in it. Roosevelt had to freeze. Roosevelt had to freeze Farber's funds through Trading with the Enemies Act, and that was Bush's grandfather. So what I'm saying is, both sides are so corrupt, and people now are fed up with both sides, and they're just hoping that Trump would bring about some change. Whether, what that's leading to is a separate issue, but what I'm saying is, if the Democrats want to blame anybody for the rise of Trump, they should blame themselves.
So Larry, who are you going to vote for, Larry?
I want to vote for Bernie Sanders, actually, or Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
As a write-in. Tulsi,
but not Kanye West.
Oh, God.
Kanye. I might vote for him. He'd be a change agent. What the heck?
Oh, God.
R. Kelly.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Tulsi Gabbard made sense, and, she was given short shrift by both the liberal and the
I think what it gets down to, and this is a cliche, but I mean, it's just down to getting the money out of politics. I mean, you gotta.
Which you're not going to do. Which you're not going to do, because don't forget, Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision where donations are a form of free speech. So you take a constitutional amendments or another shot at the Supreme Court to change that.
Yeah.
Since both sides feed off of that, Congress won't vote for it to change that law.
What they need to do, it seems to me, is to require television stations to provide a certain amount of time to each candidate, and for that not to be paid time, so that you can't swamp your station with ads, but you get a certain amount and your opponent got a certain amount.
Mhm.
And it just comes out of the air.
Yeah, well, you know, there used to be the equal time doctrine, which
Right.
they eliminated.
Yeah, they got rid
There's
of
a
it.
debate about that too, because, you know, if somebody is a more effective speaker, but full of baloney, and you have equal time with somebody who's not as articulate but is more principled, then should that be made up for by more advertising, more airtime on others? You know, it's a tough thing to decide. But you know, there's also been propositions for public funding. It all comes out of the public till, and they have only so much to spend on a campaign.
Right, right. Public funding of elections.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's a tough thing now.
But you didn't answer the question about who you're going to vote for.
No, I did. I said a write-in. Probably either Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard.
You are not a liberal Democrat, no matter what you say,
Because of why?
because of who you're going to vote for.
So, well, no, you see, I'm a traditional liberal Democrat that likes the idea of Social Security, likes the idea of some of these programs that work well, which Bernie Sanders endorsed. You know, he wasn't this crazy radical that they painted him out to be. And Tulsi Gabbard, I liked her because of her stance against these stupid wars that we're having in the Mideast for the benefit of corporations, not for the benefit of the people in those countries. The people abroad, what the slaughter we brought to all these countries, and you know, they're really corporate wars. The wars for reason. Yeah,
A friend of mine sent me an email that had 4 points to it. When 27 people were vying for the presidency, for the Democratic nomination, they said, 1, the person who ends up with the nomination may not be your first choice. 2, the person who ends up with the nomination may not be totally ideologically congruent with you. 3, the person who ends up with the nomination may have made mistakes in their past. 4, get over that shit.
I mean, you always have to make compromises with the candidate you pick. No candidate is pure.
Right.
No candidate is perfect. Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Larry, one last question. Does Kamala make any difference, in your opinion?
I think she could very well. Here again, there's pros and cons here. I think she may draw in a lot of the minority vote. However, you have to remember that during the primaries, she didn't get overwhelming support from minorities like it was anticipated. And the more she got, more she spoke about race and got aggressive about race and all that, the more her polls went down. So if she takes that stance again, I think it may be something of a negative for her. And I think among whites, conservatives, they're going to be turned off by her because of what you could describe as her stridency, if that's not just on women to use the word strident. But you know, she can be very aggressive. And don't forget, look at how she tore Biden apart during the debates. You know,
Right. Trump's got that coming. He's next. And I think that's where she'll concentrate her time and energy.
Yeah, and
on
I
beating
think
up on Trump and not on color
Right.
issues.
And I think, Larry, I feel, and I've said this, we've talked about this before, but I think the country's in a different place about race now than it was back in 2016. And I think whites are gonna,
my point is, I agree with you that it has been in a different place. It has been more enlightened until now, where they are overplaying the race card and whites are on the defensive every time they turn around. You know, I'm a racist.
how do you think, how are they overplaying the race card? I don't quite.
Because that's all they were talking about, that very much during the 4 days of the convention.
But I mean, Larry, should we say to the BLM people, Black Lives Matter people, well, pack up and go home because we're going to offend whites and they're going to be upset about, I mean, what do you tell them to do?
No, but what they should be doing is making statements that they're not on board with all the rioting, the looting, the arson, the murders, and all that, which have become part of those demonstrations. Again, there's a separation between the peaceful protests and the agitations that have accompanied them, but nobody's taken a stand on that. And that's another resentment among whites, that, where are people condemning this? Look at
in the 60s, SNCC and the other groups, they trained very rigorously their members on how to be most effective and how not to be baited into adventurism and silly actions. I mean, they were trained because the movement is responsible. So I think they need a little bit more discipline in that movement if they're capable of having the discipline, because I do think they're going to be associated with a lot of this mayhem, and makes you vulnerable even for agents provocateurs.
yeah.
The Panthers suffered from that. They couldn't deal. They had so many provocateurs inside doing stuff that they finally crumbled. So they have to watch out for that.
Yeah.
They crumbled because the police murdered them.
They murdered him, and they also they got taken advantage of inside.
Yeah, I agree.
And they did.
Well, listen,
this has
gentlemen,
been fascinating.
we've been talking for about an hour and 14 minutes, and time flies when you're having fun, I guess.
Right.
So we should probably thank Larry for coming on, and it was really nice to talk with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, let us know when.
I took a lot of incoming here.
You took a lot of
You can call the election for Trump already, but I mean for the last election, I didn't stay up to look at the voting on the election night because I figured I would just get ticked off. By election day, I figured that she had blown it.
Yeah.
He was an awful
The
candidate.
campaign was ridiculous, and talking about deplorables and things of that sort. They shot themselves in the foot, and I hope they don't do it again, which I think they could do if they talk about nothing but racism. It just not going to play. I don't think it's effective.
That's my take on it too, John. And again, I think what their calculation is that they could write off most of the whites. Some of the liberal ones, especially the college kids and all that, they'll stick. But they could write off the bulk of the white vote because they'll be able, with Tulsi, with Kamala and others, they'll be able to get enough of the minorities of all races to the polls, and that'll counteract any of the Trump vote. I think that's their calculation. Whether
We'll find out right.
Whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. That's why I'm saying this is a tough one to call.
Yeah, it's a gamble.
Yeah, it seems to me that Kamala is Black enough that they should not have to spend a lot of time and energy talking about racial issues.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
she's already Black.
She should be performing like a president. I would have her
Exactly.
playing Miss Cordiality and Miss Leader of all people and having a general coach.
Right.
Let Elizabeth Warren go out or someone else and kick ass
Yeah.
and be the
Right.
ass kicker.
Yeah. Well, listen, Jerry,
She's going to be president. If he wins, she's going to be president.
Right.
Right.
Well, let's give Jerry the last word today. What do you
Well,
think, Jerry?
Here's my last word. I'd love to talk to you again in another couple months and see exactly where you are and how you're looking at the polls and how you're feeling the pulse. Because indeed, I think what you're saying is that they're going to write off a lot of the whites. They're counting on an overwhelming amount of Blacks and other minorities to vote.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. That's why I can't call it either. It's going to be a very, very close election. And with a close election, I think you're exactly right. We're going to have a Donnybrook. We're going to say it was rigged. We're going to go to the courts. We don't know when this thing is really going to be settled. So the Electoral College is what, usually in early December, something like that. So we'll see whether or not we really have a president by then.
Well, you know, if I could have a little last word here now, if Trump gets elected, that's the last time you're going to be able to use that rock as a background because they're going to blast the hell out of it to extract the minerals.
Right.
What a waste. You know, so
Right,
it looks pretty. So take a picture of it and blast the damn thing.
I also want to put his face,
Metals
have
inside
his
that
face
box.
carved on it, you know.
Well,
George,
Trump is elected-
George, last word. What do you think?
if Trump is elected, when we have our next, our first podcast in 2021, I'll be podcasting from Botswana.
Yeah. Oh, I hope Canada opens up for us by then.
Yeah, they won't let us in,
So,
John.
John, you'll be in Canada?
got connections in
I'm only
Canada.
at 45 minutes from Canada. I can,
And how, okay, last word for you, Fred.
I have godchildren in Canada. I've spent my vacations in the last 10 years in Vancouver, British Columbia.
oh,
And
boy.
if the borders open and Trump is reelected, I will be podcasting and spending my little Social Security in Vancouver, right in East Vancouver.
Okay.
Envious.
Last word, Larry. Last word, Larry. What do you think?
Well, let me say this. If Biden's
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. If Biden's elected, I'm going to play up my association and my loyalty to Scranton and his boyhood home and what a wonderful guy he is, because, you know, I'm not stupid.
Well, hey, well, one thing.
You'll have a
Let me ask this.
Biden supporter if he gets elected.
Do you know any people? Do you know any people who knew Biden?
Not personally, but the paper is full of stories about people who knew him during his boyhood, and yeah, he was a great guy, and they missed him when he moved away, and you know his father lost his job and all that stuff. And as I'm saying, you know, that's what the Democrats used to be associated with, you know, as champions of the working class. The working class doesn't feel that way anymore, and that's why Trump got elected.
The working class ain't working.
Yeah.
At this point, right.
Yeah, and the jobs went to China, and who's responsible for that?
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thank you, everybody. And we'll talk next week. And Larry,
Next
thanks
week.
for coming on.
Thank you,
All
Larry,
right.
very much.
Hey,
Take care.
all right.
Good
All
to
right,
meet
see
you, Larry.
everybody.
Nice
Thank you.
talking with
Take care.
Bye-bye.
you. Okay.
Bye-bye.